and probably for good, I think. We're in our normal schedule now, so excited to be back. I think today we were kind of talking, most of the time these conversations and what we talk about just come out of things that have come up sort of like reoccurring for us and sort of themes that we're seeing. And one of the things I brought up is that, obviously we've talked when people reach out to us that there are sort of themes of why people reach out to us, whether they're a pitcher or hitter. For pitchers, they want to gain velo, they have some pain. Like there's these reoccurring reasons that people seek us out. But one of the things that has come up lately is just more around this concept of, I know my daughter, it's usually a parent, has inefficiencies, and we want to sort of like get rid of those inefficiencies or make sure that she's more efficient or whatever it is. And of course, sometimes that conversation is in the context of, we think that those inefficiencies are, she seems really strong, but she's not throwing that hard, or she's, having some pain. So it comes back sometimes to what they see as the results of those inefficiencies. But this like term of, we see inefficiencies has really been a common phrase that has been brought up. And I think for us is an interesting thing, because certainly that's what our assessment is measuring in some ways, is this concept of where are there, quote, inefficiencies, although I'm not sure we would like fully call it that, but where are there some breakdowns or what it looks like. But this topic that, we're going to sort of like clear a person of any inefficiencies, and that we can just sort of like see those and fix it, and that's ultimately our goal. I think that there's some nuance around that. And even I would say like sometimes pushback on like a biomech assessment or things that we do is that we put people in like boxes and we try. I would say that the way we go after inefficiencies is actually very thoughtful, and is to avoid just putting everyone in a box, or to avoid making everyone look very cookie cutter. So I think just kind of talking through that topic and maybe how we see it, of the types of things, inefficiencies, quote, that we would chase coming out of an assessment, or that we would see in an assessment that we would chase, and the nuance behind that, and not just here are the norm. I see the like sort of the black and white version of that, or here are the norms, and our goal is just to get you right in the middle of it. And look, we're efficient, which is not always the sort of path that we're chasing. So I don't know, Ashley, maybe I'll kick it to you first, because you're seeing some of these themes and some of the work you're doing at the college level also. But just as you're looking at a pitcher, and the idea is, of course, to sort of chase efficiencies, like what are the considerations that go into that sort of big picture?
The first thing I want to start with is when we originally designed the Biomech report with Driveline, the pitching version. Obviously, we got their equipment, collected their data, they were able to process it for us, and then we're like, okay, what should it look like? What product should we give back to someone who is getting an assessment? What we started with, and honestly, which is still in the report now, and the next iteration of it, I will probably likely take this out, and for this reason, is that in all of the patterns, we're looking at the posture, the positioning of your trunk versus your levers, how much rotation they're getting and what timing. And we're looking at the normative ranges of when athletes normally do these things. So I originally broke those up between the velo tier that the athlete was currently in and the velo tier above them. And interestingly, there is no difference. And so you do not see this very clear, athletes who throw 65, look what their patterns look like versus the athlete who throws 58. They're just the normative ranges are literally right on top of each other. So what this is indicating, this does not mean that if you clean up patterns, has no impact on velocity. But what this means is that there is not this just close-knit relationship, meaning that like if we want to go after X, we have to assume it's in patterns. What we're actually finding is when we are looking deeper at someone's level of strength, their level of power, this is what's really underlying. Now, when we see an athlete is very high in those things and their inefficiency is just, it's not that it's out of range for someone that's 65. It's out of range for someone who's throwing 57, right? There's such a high level of inefficiency. Now we know, hey, you've got the engine to produce more power. We've got to clean this up in order to get that to match. That would be an example. It is not just as simple as let's make your patterns follow this flow. And now all of a sudden you're going to throw harder. And that would be a great example. Why? It's not patterns and patterns alone. It's not efficiency. So I want to start with that because I think that's very interesting. One of the biggest things about the the way in which we display the data back to someone is not only to look at the level of efficiency and inefficiency, because something could look like it's out of range, but really it's not that out of range considering how most athletes do it. So it's not this high inefficient pattern. If it's somewhat in range or just very, someone on the edge. And what we're really looking at in addition to that is the timing at which it's happening appropriate. So it could just be a timing issue. It could be the engine you're bringing to the table. So we were really able to break down all of those things. What I will say next is that this is why starting with your goals is crucial. So what we never do in any assessment process, whether it's with the high school level athlete or any of the college debriefs that we're doing, is go right into the biomech report. We always start with this front page of what are our goals for this pitcher. It involves things like maybe we want to go up in a velo tier. Maybe we don't, but maybe we want to go up in a velo tier. Maybe we need to add an off speed. We need her to get more sink. We got to see at least 2 more inches of backspin. These are all just a variety of examples. We have to pull out some horizontal break on this pitch so that she has something to her arm side. We're laying out all these things. Maybe it's just that her ball flight itself is great and she has some serious command issues and we want to understand why. So we lay that out. Maybe it's we're good with where we are, but she has a lot of arm pain and we need to figure that out, right? And so everything is about what does it look like for this pitcher to be good? That's the first question. And we want to go into patterns and start to see what's wildly out of range and maybe what's just barely out of range, but still is connected to the goals that we just wrote. I have had times where I'm like, okay, she's right on edge for her arm length basically being too stiff. She's on edge. So you could very clearly just skip over that and be like, but it's in range. But noting what we did about her ball flight, how her fingers work around the ball, how she doesn't have enough rotation, we need that to get further in range, right? And so knowing the context of what we're chasing to start then allows us to go into patterns. So are we looking at inefficiencies? Of course, but it is not in some blanket like everyone's patterns, they look like X and we have to make them look like Y. You have to know what would be going after. If we love the way someone's brake profile, the changes of speeds they're making, and they're just throwing like 58, but we see the engine they're bringing to the table, their strength, their power, and they've got inefficiencies in their pattern, but they have no pain, we might be leaving those inefficiencies alone because we know that cleaning up patterns is not going to make her go up in velo. And we already like what she's doing on the ball. So that's another great example of how it's not just about going after things. I just got off a call in a consulting call here where there was a school where there's a freshman and her patterns are like kind of wild. Like her patterns itself are not bad, but it's like a big step, herky jerky. Her trunk does nothing. It's just all her arms ripping. And the coach said, I think we're going to get a lot out of this pitcher because she was literally taught this by her pitching coach growing up, right? And so she was taught to just like take a big step. She was like, oh, just start with your foot behind the rubber so your step is in front. Not understanding, it's not just about being legal with a step. This pitcher is a freshman, literally has nothing. So sometimes I will write in their initial ball flight, has no identity from a ball flight standpoint yet. There's no identity. Everything is just a little bit of glove side sweep, pretty much vertically neutral. There's not a lot going on there. So I write like, hopefully has a great changeup. And so that's a really good example of that youth coach is not actually paying attention to what matters most. Just went after this is what patterns should and should not look like. Let's make them clean. Let's make them this, whatever that version looks like. But doesn't understand it, that those very same patterns, which is what we see the overwhelming majority of the time at the high school level, are giving her nothing of value, nothing, right? And so it's like, it's very, very, very important to start in that direction. And we have said this time and time again. I think there are a lot of real issues at the youth level and how we teach pitching. And I'm not talking youth level like 10. I'm talking like 16, 17, 18. Yeah. But the number one, the heart of every issue is that we start going after changes, talking about God knows what, even if we're like, no, that's not a change you would want to make, without understanding what the pitcher actually does and what the goals really are for her. Yeah. That's the heart of the issue.
I was thinking I took some notes about hitting. One of the things that we've seen, and I think this idea of inefficiency is that, okay, in hitting, we have the thing that really sort of leads the scaling to each level, which is exit velocity and bat speed, because bat speed feeds into exit velocity. So you are not going to play at a top power 4 and hit the ball 65 as your max. Like that just doesn't, you're not going to do that. And so we know that that's sort of like, that's the threshold that's going to continue. And whether we've measured it or not, you know a kid that hits the ball hard enough to play at that level. And so there's that. But then there's also adjustability, which does matter. So you could have a kid that hits at 80, but swings and misses all the time because their bat patches has zero adjustability to it. And so some of the things we see in assessments, and I think just like this is a nuanced story that you have to continue to make sure you're focusing, as you say, Ashley, on like the right things that we're going after. Is that very similarly, it's like, what is your underlying power? What is the engine we would expect you to have? Like how hard would we expect you to hit the ball just based on your underlying power? And then how efficient are your patterns? And those feed two things. They feed power, so exit velocity, and for hitting, they feed adjustability, which also for you, they feed break. And that adjustability is probably different because sometimes they don't have adjustability. They just have one break, but it feeds some sort of ability to get something on the ball. And so, we do have hitters that come out of the assessment, and there's a variety of different things we could say. As you're saying, your underlying power is off the charts. We have had this, is off the charts, and you're hitting the ball average. So there is a breakdown. The patterns are stopping you from hitting the ball hard. And so we would expect that if we clean up some of your swing mechanics, we would see a jump in exit velocity. We just had a kid like this where I was like, literally, I think if you make a couple moves, like if you're, she was not going to train with us after, I'm like, you should be holding the people accountable that pretty quickly here, based on everything we're seeing, you should see a pretty aggressive jump, and then it might plateau and we have to go for some other things, but there are inefficiencies in your swing. That's a more rare story, to be perfectly blunt. What is more common is your exit velocity is actually exactly where we expect it to be with your underlying power. And so, but that doesn't mean that we don't chase inefficiencies at all, because sometimes the inefficiencies are feeding a lack of adjustability that is problematic no matter what. Like it just doesn't matter what level you're playing. So we have athletes where we're like, we're not actually, if we clean up your swing, we're not going to see a jump in exit velocity right now. You need to build the engine for that to come through. And that might cap you from going up in levels that you want. And so you better get in the gym and do the things you need to build that. But what we can clean up by cleaning up your inefficiencies is the fact that your average launch angle is 40. So not only do we're struggling a little bit to hit the ball hard, and we're also hitting in the air all the time. Or the flip of that, you can only touch an outside middle pitch, with any sort of power. And so we need to have adjustability on that. So sometimes we can go after patterns, but it's really important to understand, to your point, of what is the anticipated result of going after that pattern, and not to lose that, because sometimes we have hitters who will be like, well, I've been working so hard and my exit velocity hasn't gone up. And I was like, well, I didn't say your exit velocity was going to go up. Like, because the cleanup in the swing is not tied to that. We don't see a mismatch in what your exit velocity is and your power. And so that's not what it's tied to. It doesn't mean we just sit back because you do have some inefficiencies. Now, sometimes the story is literally, you're adjustable. Your exit velocity is what we expect it to be. And we're literally, it doesn't mean you're not going to hit, but your hitting is just to maintain that while you are trying to build the engine underneath. And so we want to keep variability. We want to keep all these things. We don't want to get stuck in anything. That is also a story, and probably a more frustrating one. I think it's a great story because you got one thing to work on, but probably a more frustrating one because, to your point, Ashley, we've been fed so much that we're supposed to be doing something. We're supposed to be changing something. We're supposed to be cleaning up something. And sometimes it's like, nah, there's nothing for me here as the hitting coach to do besides give you a very holistic, good program that's feeding what you currently have while we kind of wait for that to come along. So that's what you want out of the assessment. So when we're talking about inefficiencies, sure, it's like we do want to attack inefficiencies, but you need to know what that is tied. What is the end goal of that? And then you need to stay in at least the sort of short term coming out of that assessment. The coach needs to stay, the parents need to stay, the athletes need to stay really tied to that story, because it's so easy to veer off track. All of a sudden you see the kid not having success and you're like, you said that this was going to be whatever. I'm like, well, but that's not exactly what we said. We didn't just say it's like a magic thing. And like, it was tied to this particular thing, which we think helps. Yes, long-term is going to continue to build for that athlete, but it didn't, inefficiency cleanup didn't mean she was going to jump 10 miles per hour in exit velocity and suddenly you were going to jump a whole, 3 tiers of plane level. Like that's also not what we're saying here. So I think that's the important part. And to your point, without the assessment, even for our coaches who are so tied to data and things, it's so easy to just start randomly saying things and attacking things. And so certainly in the youth world, which has been born out of this sort of concept of no data, I'm going to sit over your shoulder and I'm going to do, help
fix you,
things up,
fix you.
We get removed from that concept. And, at best, it's just kind of like banging your head against the wall. And sort of at its worst, as we've said, you're chasing things that are not the right things, or you're trying to clean up inefficiencies that are not the right things, or you guys are speaking over each other because the coach is cleaning up inefficiencies and they say it's going to have this effect and it doesn't. The parent and the kid are frustrated. And that's kind of the world we live in. So that's kind of the way I see how we attack things. And it is such an important thing that out of an assessment that you get that sort of story of this is right now, this is the thing we're going to target. And we expect, we're going to keep an eye on X metric. And that's what we expect to change and maybe hold the other things or whatever you're watching.
Interestingly, the opposite happens at the college level. They already get to that point because they can do something pretty good. So people are afraid to make changes because they don't want to undo it.
Yeah.
And so where a lot of my job comes in is to literally make that very clear that if we go after this, if her posture gets to this, let's give an example. If her posture gets here and we really target that, it should keep her from having so much of an arm abduction issue, right? She should be in better alignment. When you have alignment with the arm is like posture for the trunk, right? So you need posture to rotate. When the arm gets away from the body, it has to spend its time just pulling into alignment and you lose rotation. Right? So if it's already in alignment, as it slots, it will rotate more. So if we're going after something like that, what my job is to explain is like, hey, if the arm gets in better alignment, if the arm gets this rotation, it is likely, you see where her fingers are here now, we would expect her fingers to get here. And what that would mean on the ball, of course, at delivery, that would mean more sync. That would mean that she could potentially get the thumb off the ball and go from more, just straight horizontal sweep and get a little more backspin to it. So my job is to say, if this trunk makes that change, it should do this to the arm, and that's what it should do. And so we will know if that's working if the ball starts to do X. But I know because I've seen, 6 billion of these cases at this point, what will happen. And then there are times on the flip side where the arm is in a jacked up spot and then the recovery slices the inside of the ball and creates something. And I know that if we now put that arm in better alignment, what's going to happen is the fact that all she had time for was to recover out of that arm slot, slice the inside of the ball. Now she has a freakish pitch. If we now make the arm in an actual healthier slot, XYZ, it's likely going to take that backspin down. She's going to have just more sweep. And so now I know the reversal of that, right? And so much at the college level is basically making them feel comfortable that this pattern gives her this. If we change it, it will give more versus it will give less. And that's where our recommendations really go from here. This case just came up last week, I think, on a call where it was, we're going to make these pattern changes for an athlete who has really good sweep. She's got sweep. She's a lefty. She also has up and has a tiny bit down. And the coach wants to go to stretch the down. And I'm like, in my experience, when you work for down, this is what happens. And here's why. Based on what her arm action does, all she gets is this like inside of the ball. If we start getting her behind the ball, it's going to impact what makes her great. Now she's an off-speed pitcher all the way across the board. So we think we have a shot just because this is a very, very smart coach. This is not an amateur coach, right? So we assessed every little risk reward. And I said, we're going to know fast if we can't target this, if we can't go after it. So in the very first week, we started to see the down. All the up was holding, all the horizontal break was holding, but velo plummeted. And he's like, maybe this is wrong. I'm like, no. In no way, shape, or form would velo be tied. If velo is going to alter at all, it's going to go up because now you're putting the arm into actual, like the alignment thing is going to help velo. That definitely has nothing to do with the pattern changes. The way we will know is if this was a bad idea is if this and this are affected, and they're not right now. So we keep going. And then sure enough, we start getting into some of these stories, and the athlete, it's the first week of school. They start asking how many calories she's eating. It's like not even half as much as she needs, right? Like there was a fuel issue with this athlete and just getting back in. But I felt I felt 100% confident in that discussion, 99.9, that like, no, this is not an indicator. That doesn't link to us. And so that's a good example of like, you have to know the nuances. It's not even just velo versus break. It's also when the arm slots like this, it will give you break that looks more like X versus Y. Is that the direction we're going toward, or the one we're afraid to lose?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some like maybe like a pseudonym is kind of happening between this word of inefficiency. I just think of compensations, right? And compensations just come from inefficiency in movement patterns. It doesn't necessarily or inherently mean that they're wrong. And then I think like, well, inefficiency and variability is a very thin line, right? In terms of like, you can be inefficient, but you want to have a threshold of variability, because we also don't want to just, bucket kids into the same style or the norms, and everyone's going to do it a little bit differently. I feel like sometimes the language just kind of shifts from like, we're still talking about the same thing. We're talking about chasing compensations, whether you're saying she's inefficient and her pitching instructor is trying to make her less inefficient. To me, that just still sounds like we're chasing compensations without really knowing what the root of the compensation is and why that compensation, eliminating it or allowing it to flourish, is good or bad. We don't know what the risk reward is of that. And then as you guys were talking, I kind of had this like kind of zoomed out approach. So when I hear inefficiency, we're talking about it from a swing and from a pitching pattern standpoint. I then go to like, you've training inefficiency, and like not just in, your hitting training or your pitching training, but you have inefficiency in how your body is being prepared to be efficient in these very high velocity, top tier things that you do inside of the game. And it's like, so when I hear like, oh, well, she's very inefficient. And then I'll hear like, well, we don't have a strength and conditioning program. I'm like, well, we can't really chase inefficiencies yet. And I bet a lot of those are going to clean themselves up when your body is better prepared, when you're bringing more into the batter's box, more into the pitching circle, and the efficiency of what you're attacking in training goes up, and you're not just chasing all the things. And so I hear, like, as you guys are talking, I just hear this sort of exchange of like, okay, inefficiency to me is like talking about chasing compensations 2 years ago. That's what we were kind of battling, was this like, I see your glove arm flying, or, I see your bat path dumping. And we just go in and we manipulate that. Maybe it's a verbal cue. Maybe it's literally like attaching something to them. And we're like, but that's just going to make her inefficient somewhere else. And when we talk about inefficiency, your risk reward of what you choose to go and attack. Ash, your example is perfect of like, if we're going to go and attack this, and we're going to take the risk to go after a down pitch and someone who's typically on the inside of the ball, here's how we're going to know if it pays off. And that ultimately is how you know if you're chasing inefficiencies the right way and chasing the right inefficiencies, and whether the payoff is worth it. And I think like, this idea of risk reward is really at the root of chasing inefficiencies, because it's all inefficient. I mean, that's what human movement is. Human movement is by far inefficient, especially the higher velocity that we get. If we're just walking around, no big deal. We need to be efficient. But when you're talking about pitching a softball, swinging a bat, sprinting at high velocities, it's going to be inefficient. There's no chasing this perfect amount of efficiency. And I think I always want to just caution like coaches and parents of not falling in the trap of like, we see a metric, for example, it's always velo in pitching, of course, but it's been spin rates, right? That if a little bit is good, more must be better. So let's chase spin rates, or spin efficiency, ironically, in that word, or chasing launch angle. It's like, we don't go after one thing. It's about the risk reward of like, if we go after this one thing, what then is the trade-off? And that's the efficiency overall of training. And so I think we've just exchanged this word of like, inefficiency is just, what compensations does she have? And is it worth going after them?
Yeah.
You know what? Like, reason number 438,000 of why the like youth level makes you want to put a fork in my eye is because
Careful. The Facebook guys are going to come after you.
Yeah, you're gonna have some new fans if you're not careful.
Don't care. This is the world that the most of the high school level athletes at OGX, they're still developing.
Yeah.
They are literally still developing.
Children.
We don't really even get to this point. What I am describing, what I just said to you happened with that college coach last week. This is an athlete who is 21 years old, 22 years old. This is what we've got to work with. We know we're not like, let's see what happens to her power as she gets in the weight room and really starts to develop, and as her body starts to stabilize, and she starts to stabilize in her, how much she's growing and how much mass she's put on. That's done. And so now we are literally working on the nuances. The reality of why at the youth level, everyone's on this merry-go-round of just losing their damn minds is because they want to start doing those things, and you will at some point, but you have to keep more of an organic approach and let things build at the youth level. You can't just jump in and get nuance because they're not finished developing yet. And so we don't know what they're going to look like from a body standpoint. I'm talking 16-year-olds. We don't know.
Right. There's no stable foundation yet.
No.
It doesn't.
So we are generally going after more, higher levels of efficiency, meaning getting their trunk to do more for them, because that is more likely going to just raise their ceiling across the board, throwing harder, having more variability. And then once it stabilizes, you know what? When we are at the college level, we look at the freshmen, I would say less than 50% of the freshmen, we still look at them of like, well, they're a baby. Well, they're a baby. We don't know. We got to let this. There's such an organic approach to the freshmen, I would say 70% of the time. Yet the 14-year-old, we're pissed that we're not working on finger position or getting 2 more inches of break. We're like, we're not there yet. You have to take a more organic approach. Don't even get me started, because obviously every travel ball dude and dad in the world will light up Facebook, as they already did, if we talk about the age of like 14, 15 and below. It's not even a thing, right? You're just trying to become an athlete. Then you have like 15 to probably 18, where now you're just trying to see how much can we grow everything? How much can we grow velo, your athleticism, your strength, your power, variability, off speeds? How much can we grow everything? Now you're at the college level, and we're just going to hone in on what's the best. And now we're going to really work on nitpicking little changes to make the best, and we're going to cut out everything else, right? And so that's the change, that's the growth. And so I do think it often looks really sort of like not nonchalant, but a little bit less targeted in this high school level. And you know why? Because it freaking is. And you know why it is? Because it freaking needs to be. So I think this is where I get frustrated of just like when I say, when you treat pitching like the conversation I just had at the SEC level for someone that's one of the best athletes in the country last year, and you start applying those approach to someone who's 16, sure as hell you start approaching someone who's 11, you will make them worse. That's the reality.
You cap them, you get them stuck in the thing. I was thinking too, this is a little sort of like on the topic before, but I was having a conversation, I think, of this idea of like what you're going after. And I was having a conversation with an international player that we work with, and she's trained with us for a couple of years now, and I was like, what do you need from me at this point? Do you want me to write programming, or we're a little removed from an assessment, she has some time, it's not that easy for her to get here all the time, and she was like, I feel pretty good, like I'll probably just go back to this time last year and kind of see what we were doing, and I feel like confident in things. But even at that level, there's still some like, well, we're worried about this very specific pattern thing or whatever. And so what we have decided is she's just going to kind of do her own programming, or piece together some things we've done and the things she knows work. And all my role is going to be with her is that she has access to data. She's going to upload data, and we're going to meet every other week to track it. And so there's this conversation around when you do get to that level, yes, we have a lot of systems of how we have gone after things that we feel very confident in, that have been tested, but the way we tested them was that we looked at the influence on the data, and then we sort of, when it went, when for too long it was trending in the wrong direction, we made an adjustment, and we kept watching. And at the highest level, that's what you're doing. So to your point, Ashley, you shouldn't not know at that level if what you're doing is having a positive or negative influence, because you should be so tied to whatever you are trying to do with that change or with that training, that you get 2 weeks of a trend in the wrong direction, that you can at least start asking questions like you did of, okay, well, is it like, what are we doing in our program? Is this what we would have expected to see? do we need to look at something else? Do we need to look at the fact that you might be overtraining, or, what is that concept? And the real problems, that we're saying, there's sort of two things. At the very highest level, it's getting removed from that for too long. If you're removed from that and you're just chasing random things, like, that's just not a good idea with a high level athlete. Like, there's just, you have no idea if that's having the impact you want. You don't know if it's a good or a bad change. Like, yes, maybe pain is one that you can see, like she had pain, now she doesn't, whatever, but you just have no idea of the performance measurement. So you can attack it however you want. Obviously, we think our systems are great, but you can attack it however you want, but you better be tied to what you're doing at that level. And at the youth level, it's this idea of, we're still not tied to any data, but we're going to go after it that targeted and think that that's going to have any influence. And what we see of youth hitters and pitchers that come having that mindset is their patterns are really bad. And they are very stuck in something that is not great, and it doesn't give them basis. And as I said, from an exit velo, it doesn't matter if I can then clean up that pattern. If that capped you from continuing to scale up the tiers you needed to, from an exit velocity, from just the basis that is the threshold for the level you say you want to play at, that's kind of where the story ends. And what we always say is, we have so many stories of pitchers and hitters who were able to go later in the recruiting process due to either setbacks and from injuries, because they developmentally, they were a little later than their peers, as long as they continued to take this broad approach and just continued to sort of scale up the things that they needed to. If they have the skill set that's needed at that level, it doesn't matter if you're late in the development. But if you are trying to race and sort of target these things, and you cap your ability to do that, or you don't have that ability, because we don't all genetically have that, but you've been told to do that, that's where the crazy happens. It's you either, maybe you did have the engine, but you got capped because you just got so hyper focused on this that you did create an inefficiency that blocked your ability to express that power, to have variability, to do all those things. And now it's too late, whatever, it's just too late to clean it, or the pattern is too hard to clean, or you just were an early bloomer and really you never had the engine to begin with, but you keep being told that. And so you keep if you would just fix me, I would be able to do that. You keep being told this story that's there's nothing to fix here. You don't have the engine. And so let's see if maybe you're right now, you look like a pitcher that would be pretty successful at a D2 level. Let's see if we can bump you to a mid-major D1, if that's what you want. Or let's see if we can bump you to a D2 ace. Let's see if we can take you in the tier you are and just bump you one notch. And that's the fun part about player development. But this story of, I can take you from, a kid that has what we would call a power output that, looks like you're going to throw 55 and make you throw 65. That's just not real. And it doesn't matter how much I attack your patterns. And so that story, I think, when we look at the youth level and all the craziness that's happening, it is that world where, in order for me to stay in business, I need to tell you I can do that for you. And I don't have any basis for whether I can actually do that for you. And sort of parents desperate to give their kids the best opportunity. And then the kids are well, I'm supposed to be getting better and I'm not. And there's just this level of frustration that's happening. And I think that's the world where we just have to keep just looking at what the story is actually telling us and just being truthful about that. And it's sometimes that story maybe isn't what you want to hear. You think you can jump a ton of tiers, and it's just that's not exactly what we expect, but we do think you can get a lot better if we attack X, Y, and Z, and that would look like this, and that might get you the opportunity to do Y, and those types of things. And so that's kind of what we see, but I don't know. It's a random aside. We got 1 minute. Wrap us up.
All right. Well, I already got angry in my last one, so I'll leave it at that. But it's we should. Well, it's just because the level of education is so bad, and I feel for some of these families because at the youth level, it's it's a scam. It's just a straight up scam of the level of information. You know what else is a scam? September 1st. We should bring that into. You've let me out of the cage. What do you expect? I haven't been on in a couple of weeks. But we should bring that in. That's a whole nother level of scam. And I think what's interesting, I brought this up a couple months ago of it's so interesting to live mostly on the college level side now, when I usually live all of my time with the high school level athletes and their families. And it just shows me now like how big the bridge is and how big the gap is.
Well,
and so September,
they come and they're like, it's 2 weeks before September 1st of their junior year. And they're like, we don't know what to expect. Like, once we know, then we'll kind of see where to go from there. And it's always tough. We're not really in the position with sometimes we are, but like, if you don't know what you're going to expect on September 1st, I think I know what you're going to expect on September 1st.
I think I know what you're going to expect.
Yeah. And also, I feel as if, we should bring this. What I'm saying is, can we talk about this next week? So let's do this. But I think what we should talk about is this idea of basically September 2nd hits, and it's as if basically half the universe, a bomb went off, and now they're like trajectory is all down, which could not be further from the truth, right? And so I think there's so many misconceptions. There's so many, it's just like a giant like myth and scam fed by a side of people that I'm not too fond of, as you guys know, at the youth level and the travel ball level. So hopefully more discussions to come with those people to be able to get into some common ground and bridge the gap. The gap is so damn large. So I think this is a good example of today, of this idea of the conversations you get on sales calls, Krista. It just goes to show how large the gap is from the youth level to the college level. That's one example. Training, what you're even going for, what it means to be good. And then there's even these little nuanced things of the recruiting side. So I think it'd be an interesting conversation. My vote is to bring it in, and it's going to be a sassy one. It's going to be spicy, but who's not up for that?
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, maybe
see you next week for a spicy little episode of the OGX podcast.
Stay tuned.
All right. Until next week. We need you to like and subscribe and review the podcast so that we can keep making it every week for you. And maybe even drop what topic you'd like us to talk about or rant about or whatever we do every week.